Your garage is 27 feet onto my land. That's what Vanessa Caldwell, president of Silver Ridge Estates, told me while standing in my driveway with an HOA property consultant. 2 orange boundary stakes and an aerial map with a thick red line cutting straight through my property. She gave me 10 days to tear out my retaining wall, move part of my garage, and sign a document admitting I had built on HOA land. There was just one problem. I was T in her HOA, and after nearly 30 years working around civil construction records, property plats, drainage plans, and county permits, I knew the map in Vanessa's hand wasn't a real survey, so I didn't argue. I didn't touch the stakes. I photographed everything. Called a licensed boundary surveyor, and waited. The next morning, he stood on the ridge behind my house, checked his equipment one more time, then looked toward Vanessa's $1.8 million mansion. Daniel, he said, your garage is T over the line. Then he pointed toward her swimming pool. Her house is. The certified survey would eventually show her pool, stone terrace, retaining wall, and even part of her guest wing sitting on my land, but that still wasn't the worst thing Vanessa had done, because when I started digging through the records, I found evidence that she had known exactly where that property line was years before she ever accused me. The moment Vanessa's Range Rover disappeared down the road, that first morning I went back inside and laid her notice across my kitchen table. 27 feet, that number kept bothering me. My property wasn't something I had bought on impulse. Before I closed on those 11 acres, I had reviewed the deed, the subdivision plat, the drainage plans, and every recorded easement attached to the parcel. That was habit. 30 years around civil construction teaches you something pretty quickly. People make mistakes. Paper usually remembers them. I pulled my closing file from the cabinet and opened the original plat. My garage sat well inside the western boundary. Not close, not questionable. Well inside it. Then I checked the dimensions again, if Vanessa's red line was correct. The property monument near the creek would have to be almost 30 feet east of where the county plat showed it. That made no sense. I walked outside with a tape measure and followed the line toward the ridge. That was when I noticed the second orange stake, then the third. Someone had been farther onto my property than I realized. The third stake was planted directly inside Rebecca's garden. I stopped there. Rebecca had been gone 4 years, but I still kept that patch the way she liked it. Lavender along the stones, rosemary near the fence, yellow roses facing west. For the first time that morning, I felt angry. Not because Vanessa had made a bad claim, because somebody had walked into that garden and marked it like they already owned it. I did pull the stake out. I took pictures, wide shots, close-ups, measurements. Then I went back inside and started a folder. By noon, I had made one phone call, not to Vanessa. Not to the HOA, to a licensed boundary surveyor named Mark Ellison. When I told him the number Vanessa was claiming, he went quiet. 27 feet? Yeah. Another pause, Daniel. Don't move those stakes. That was the moment I knew this was about to get bigger. Mark couldn't come until the next morning, which gave me plenty of time to think about why Vanessa had picked me. From the outside, I probably looked easy, 61 years old, retired, old Ford truck, work boots more often than dress shoes. I lived alone in a modest house on 11 acres beside a neighborhood full of stone entrances. Manicured lawns and homes that cost more than I had ever planned to spend. What Vanessa didn't know was that I had spent nearly 30 years managing civil engineering projects. Roads, drainage systems, retaining walls, utility corridors. I wasn't a licensed surveyor, and I never pretended to be one, but I had read enough plats, permit sets, and construction drawings to know when somebody was trying to make a line say something it did. The land mattered for another reason, too. Rebecca and I had bought it together. She used to stand on the ridge at sunset and tell me where she wanted the porch, where the garden would go, and which trees I wasn't allowed to touch. Cancer took her before we ever finished those plans. So after she died, I finished them myself. That house was an investment to me. It was the last thing we had built together. Mark arrived just after 8 the next morning with a tripod. GPS equipment, and the kind of quiet expression surveyors get when they don't trust what they've been told. I showed him Vanessa's map. He studied it for maybe 10 seconds. Then he looked at me. Who drew this, the HOA? That wasn't my question. He folded it once and handed it back. For the next hour, Mark worked downhill toward the creek. Then I heard him call my name. He was kneeling beside an old iron pin buried under several inches of dirt. He brushed the soil away. Stamped into the metal was the original subdivision reference number. Mark looked toward Vanessa's mansion. Then back at the pin. This is exactly where your deed says it should be. I looked toward the nearest orange hoe stake. It was 26 feet away. Mark spent another 40 minutes working uphill. He found the second monument near a stand of pines and checked both points against the recorded coordinates. Same result, the original boundary hadn't moved. Vanessa's orange stakes had. Mark reset his equipment and projected the true property line across the slope. I followed behind him as he marked it. The line passed nowhere near my garage, not even close at its nearest point. My retaining wall still sat more than 20 feet inside my property. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. So that's it, I asked. Her claim's dead? Mark didn't answer. He was staring past me toward Silver Ridge, toward Vanessa's house. Her mansion sat higher on the ridge than mine, all stone walls, oversized windows, and a swimming pool built into a broad western terrace. Mark checked the screen in his hand, then the monument, then the mansion again. His expression changed, not surprise, concern. He started walking toward the boundary. I followed him. About halfway up the hill, he stopped beside Vanessa's retaining wall and placed a temporary marker in the grass, then another near the edge of her pool deck. Daniel. Something in his voice made me stop talking. He pointed at the line. Your garage is over the boundary. I can see that. He looked toward the mansion, but this is, for a second, I thought he meant the landscaping. Then he walked another 15 feet and placed another marker beside the stone terrace, another near the pool, and one more almost directly beneath the corner of Vanessa's guest wing. I stared at the markers. They formed a straight line across what Vanessa treated as her backyard. Except part of it wasn't her backyard. Mark checked his measurements one last time. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. Daniel, part of that mansion is sitting on your land. Mark didn't make any more dramatic claims that day. I appreciated that. A bad survey can ruin people. A good surveyor doesn't announce conclusions until the measurements are locked down. 2 days later, he returned with the certified boundary report. We spread it across my kitchen table. The first number caught my eye. Vanessa's swimming pool crossed onto my property by roughly 11 feet. Her stone terrace went farther, about 18. The retaining wall reached nearly 22. Then Mark tapped the northwest corner of the mansion. The guest wing itself crossed the line by just over 9 feet. I stared at the page. Vanessa had given me 10 days to tear apart my garage because she claimed I was 27 feet onto her land. In reality, my garage was exactly where it belonged. Her $1 million mansion wasn't. How does something like this happen? I asked. Mark leaned back. Sometimes a contractor builds off the wrong reference point. Sometimes plans get changed after permits are approved. And sometimes, he looked at me, sometimes somebody knows that stayed with me. I could have called Vanessa right then. I could have walked to her front door with the survey and watched her face when I showed her the line running through her pool. I did. Because the location bothered me. Her mansion wasn't randomly shifted. The encroachment got wider toward the best part of the ridge. The pool had more room. The terrace had a better sunset view. The guest wing was larger. That didn't look like one bad measurement. It looked like a decision. So instead of calling Vanessa, I drove to the county building department. I asked for every permit. Site plan, revision, and inspection record tied to her address. The clerk disappeared into the back room. 20 minutes later, she returned carrying a file thick enough to need both hands. Buried near the bottom was the first thing Vanessa never expected me to find. The mansion had originally been approved in a completely different position. The original site plan was clean. Her mansion had been approved entirely inside the Silver Ridge parcel. The pool was smaller, the terrace stopped well short of my boundary, and the guest wing ended almost 30 feet east of where it stood now. I flipped through the inspection records. Foundation, framing, electrical, plumbing. Nothing jumped out until I found a second site sketch tucked behind a drainage revision. No county approval stamp. No surveyor's seal, just a handwritten note across the top. West side revision, the pool had been pushed outward. The terrace had been extended. The guest wing had shifted toward my property. I laid the approved plan beside the revision. The difference was obvious. Someone had changed the footprint after the original permit was issued. I asked the clerk whether the revision had ever been formally approved. She searched the system, then shook her head. Not that I can find who submitted it. She checked the scanned cover page, Caldwell Development Services. I knew the name. Vanessa had used the same company on several HOA projects. I copied every page I was allowed to and drove home. By then I wasn't asking whether Vanessa's mansion crossed my line. The survey had already answered that I wanted to know why. The next morning, I called the contractor listed on the original building permit. His name was Earl Benton, retired now. When I told him the address, he went quiet. Then he asked me a strange question. Is this about the west side? I didn't answer immediately. Why would you ask that? Another pause. Finally, Earl sighed because I told her not to move it. Earl agreed to meet me at a diner about 20 minutes outside town. He was in his late 60s, broad shoulders, gray beard, hands that still looked like they belonged on a job site. I brought copies of the approved site plan and the unapproved revision. He looked at them for less than a minute before pushing the second page back toward me. That's the one? The revision? He nodded. Vanessa wanted the west side moved after we'd already started layout. Why? View, bigger pool, more room around the guest wing. I asked whether he knew it crossed the property line. Earl leaned back. I told her we were getting too close. Too close isn't the same as crossing. No, which is why I asked for another survey before we poured anything permanent. What happened? He gave me a tired smile. She said it would slow the project down. Then Earl pulled out his phone. I kept something. He searched an old email archive and turned the screen toward me. The message was from Vanessa, 7 years earlier. Move the west side out. There's nothing over there anyway. We need the terrace width we discussed. I read it twice. Can you send me this? I can do better. Earl still had the original email account, project notes, and several photographs taken before concrete was poured. One photo showed temporary layout stakes exactly where the approved plan placed them. Another, taken 2 weeks later, showed those stakes moved west, toward my property. Earl looked at me. I quit that project 3 weeks after this because of Vanessa, because I was putting my license behind changes. Nobody wanted to document. That gave me motive. It gave me a timeline. And it gave me proof that Vanessa had personally ordered the footprint pushed west. But it still didn't prove she knew the land belonged to somebody else. That proof came from the HOA's own records. And Vanessa had signed it herself. Getting those records took longer than I expected. Silver Ridge didn't exactly advertise its old files, and Vanessa certainly wasn't volunteering anything. But after my attorney sent a formal records request tied to the dispute, the board produced the relevant documents. Most of it was useless. Meeting agendas, landscaping budgets, maintenance contracts. Then I found a folder from 3 years earlier. Inside was a boundary survey commissioned by the HOA itself. I stopped the western property line on that survey, matched marks almost exactly. Same monuments, same bearings, same boundary. Vanessa's mansion was already across it. Attached to the survey was a short internal memo, potential encroachment involving Caldwell residents. Further review recommended. Below that was a page from the board minutes. One sentence had been underlined. President Caldwell will handle the adjoining parcel privately. And at the bottom were Vanessa's initials. I sat there staring at them 3 years. She had known for 3 years that there was a boundary problem. She knew before she walked into my driveway, before the orange stakes appeared in Rebecca's garden, before she told me my garage was 27 feet onto HOA land, before she threatened me with litigation. That changed everything. This wasn't a president relying on a bad map. This wasn't a survey mistake. Vanessa had already seen the real line. She just needed me to accept a different one. Then I understood why her notice had included that acknowledgement form. If I signed it, she could hold up my own signature and argue that I had accepted her version of the boundary. She wasn't trying to prove I had crossed the line. She was trying to make me move it. And when Vanessa realized I had found the old survey, she stopped pretending this was a private dispute. She took it public. 2 days later, every homeowner in Silver Ridge received an email from her. The subject line read, Boundary Enforcement Update. She never mentioned her mansion. She never mentioned the old HOA survey. Instead, she described me as a hostile adjoining property owner refusing to correct a documented encroachment. According to Vanessa, my garage threatened future access, property values, and the legal integrity of the subdivision. It was impressive, in a way. She had taken a lie, wrapped it in official language, and made it sound like I was attacking the neighborhood. Then came the invitation. Emergency HOA meeting Thursday night. Community clubhouse. Vanessa wanted the board to authorize legal action against me. My attorney asked whether I wanted him to handle it without me. I told him no, I want to be there. By then, my evidence file had grown thick. Mark's certified survey, the original subdivision plat. Vanessa S. approved building plan, the unapproved West Side revision, Earl Benton S. email, his construction photographs, and the HOA's own 3-year-old survey with Vanessa S. initials at the bottom. I made 3 copies of everything. Thursday evening, I drove into Silver Ridge. The clubhouse parking lot was full. Vanessa had made sure of that. When I walked inside, nearly 50 homeowners were already seated. At the front of the room, Vanessa sat behind a long table with the board and the HOA attorney. A projector showed an aerial image of my property. The same thick red line crossed my garage. Vanessa looked at me and smiled. "Mr. Mercer, we saved you a seat." There was one empty chair at the far end of the table. I set my folder beside it. Then Mark walked in behind me, carrying a rolled survey map almost 6 feet wide. Vanessa S.'s smile faded. She had prepared that room to put me on trial. She had no idea we were about to put her property line on the wall. Vanessa spoke for almost 15 minutes. She talked about community standards, legal exposure, property values, and the danger of allowing one adjoining owner to ignore a documented boundary. I let her finish, then she turned toward me. "Mr. Mercer, do you still deny that your garage encroaches on Silver Ridge property?" "Yes." A few people shifted in their chairs. Vanessa gave a small smile. "Then perhaps you'd like to explain why." I looked at Mark. He stood, walked to the front of the room, and unrolled the certified survey across the board table. It covered almost the entire surface. The room went quiet. Mark pointed to my garage first. "Mr. Mercer S. structure is fully inside his recorded parcel." Then his finger moved west, across the property line. Toward Vanessa S. house, the line passed through the edge of her swimming pool. Across the stone terrace, through the retaining wall, then into the northwest corner of her guest wing. Nobody said anything for several seconds. Vanessa finally laughed. "That survey is obviously incorrect." So I placed the original county subdivision plat beside it. Same line, then the approved mansion site plan. Same line, then the unapproved West Side revision. Her attorney stopped taking notes. Vanessa S. face tightened. I was finished. I handed the board copies of Earl Benton's email. "Move the West Side out there's nothing over there anyway." A man in the second row read it aloud under his breath. Someone behind him said, "You told him to move the house?" Vanessa snapped back. "That email is being taken out of context maybe, but the next document didn't have a context problem." My attorney slid the HOA's own 3-year-old survey across the table. Vanessa S. initials were at the bottom. Then he looked directly at her. "Mrs. Caldwell, when did you first learn your home crossed Mr. Mercer's property line?" Vanessa looked at him like the question annoyed her. "When did I first know what? That your home crossed Mr. Mercer's property line?" She folded her arms. When his survey came back, my attorney nodded once. Then he lifted the HOA survey. "This survey?" Vanessa didn't answer. He turned it around so the room could see her initials at the bottom. The silence changed. Before, people had been confused. Now they were angry. One board member leaned forward. "Vanessa, you saw this 3 years ago?" She shook her head. "I don't remember every document placed in front of me." So I handed over the meeting minutes. "President Caldwell will handle the adjoining parcel privately." Her initials were there too. The HOA attorney closed his notebook. That was when I knew Vanessa had lost the room. She tried one last time. "This still doesn't change the fact that there is a legitimate boundary dispute." Mark answered before I could. "No, Mom. A boundary dispute means the location is uncertain." He tapped the survey. "This location isn't uncertain." A homeowner near the back stood up. "So why were we told his garage was on HOA land?" Vanessa looked toward the board. Nobody helped her. Another homeowner asked who authorized the legal threats. Then somebody wanted to know why HOA money had been spent pursuing a dispute that protected Vanessa S. private residence. The meeting stopped being about me. It became about Vanessa. Within a week, the board suspended her authority to act on behalf of the association while the matter was reviewed. But that didn't erase the encroachment. Her pool was still on my land. Her terrace was still on my land, and part of her mansion was still on my land, so the next time Vanessa and I faced each other, there were no newsletters, no clipboards, and no red lines drawn across aerial photographs. There was a judge. By the time the case reached court, Vanessa's story had changed again. Now she claimed the boundary had always been ambiguous. Her attorney argued that the mansion had stood there for years, and that forcing structural changes would create an unreasonable hardship. The judge listened. Then he reviewed Mark S. certified survey, the original subdivision plat, the approved building plan, the unapproved revision, Earl S. records, and the older HOA survey bearing Vanessa S. initials. The argument that my garage sat on HOA property didn't survive the evidence. The recorded boundary was confirmed. My garage had never crossed onto Silver Ridge property. Vanessa S. structures had crossed onto mine. The court awarded me damages and costs tied to the encroachment and rejected the boundary claim Vanessa had used against me. That left one practical problem. Her structures were still standing on my property. She could remove the encroaching portions and restore the land, or she could try to negotiate with me for the strip beneath them. For the first time that morning, Vanessa turned and looked directly at me. Months earlier, she had stood in my driveway demanding that I sign away my boundary. Now she needed my agreement if she wanted to keep her pool, terrace, retaining wall, and guest wing exactly where they were. After the hearing, her attorney approached me in the hallway. Mrs. Caldwell would like to discuss purchasing the affected strip. I asked what they were offering. He gave me a number. I almost laughed. It didn't even cover what her fight had already cost me, so I said no. Not because I wanted revenge, because I had spent months proving the land was mine. I was going to sell it simply because Vanessa had finally run out of fake maps. A few weeks later, the first demolition crew arrived at her mansion, and the orange stakes were finally going somewhere they belonged. The work took 6 days. Not the whole mansion, just everything that never should have crossed the line. The stone retaining wall came down first, then part of the terrace. The pool crew cut back the western edge and rebuilt it inside Vanessa's actual property. The hardest section was the guest wing. The portion crossing the line had to be removed and reconstructed. I watched most of it from my porch. I didn't celebrate. I didn't take pictures for social media. I just watched the property line slowly become visible again. Vanessa never came over. 2 months later, she resigned from the HOA board. The homeowners ordered an independent review of the legal actions she had authorized. Silver Ridge also adopted a new rule requiring a licensed survey before the HOA could make any future boundary claim, and they prohibited the board from sending property violation notices to owners who weren't actually members of the association. That one made me smile. By fall, Vanessa put the mansion on the market. A family from Denver eventually bought it. The first thing the new owner did was walk over and introduce himself. Then he pointed toward the fresh boundary markers. I figured we should both know exactly where those are. I laughed. That's already an improvement. Before winter came. I went back to the spot where Vanessa's orange stake had been driven through Rebecca's garden. I replanted the lavender, reset the stones, and beside the roses, I placed a small marker with 2 words carved into it. Rebecca's garden. A few feet away stood the original iron property monument, still exactly where it had always been. Vanessa thought a red line on a photograph could change who owned the land. She thought a title, an HOA, and enough legal threats could make me accept her version of the truth. But property lines don't move because somebody with a clipboard wants them to. Sometimes the truth is already there, buried in the ground, waiting for someone patient enough to find it.